Let's start with a very interesting story from Alexand 23. My 17F manager had me leave the new girl waiting tables on her own, so I took her at her word. I, 17F, am a waitress slash server slash cashier at a semi-local Italian chain. Not going to say which, but it's considered a specialty of the DMV area. I recently had to take a month off of work for health reasons, since I was in the emergency room and then had to spend time in inpatient. While I was away, there were huge changes at my job, including new managers and two new employees. I've only been working there since last June, but I picked things up pretty quickly, barring the first day I had to deal with a packed dining room by myself while still in training. I'd messed up pretty badly with the computer system and needed the manager's help. Still, it happens. Yesterday, I met the new girl for the first time. It was her third day still in training. She's my age and a complete sweetheart, and as the dining room slowly became more and more packed, we made a great team. She got to practice working with the computers and talking to customers while I took down the orders and showed her how everything worked. It was her first time properly serving there, and she really did great considering that, certainly at first. The other two people who were working was a manager and one other hourly employee. The managers at my job will also serve and work the counters. Basically, all waitresses have to do double the work, and we still get paid dirt. But that's another story. I was running between the dining room and the counters to try to keep up, although we can only serve max 2 people at the counters picking up or placing orders at a time. It was to the point where my manager and her friend had bundled up and complained about how cold it was while I was flushed, with my coat off, covered in sweat, cleaned myself up when dealing with the food, of course. The manager and her friend were sitting down together, alternating between scrolling on their phones and talking, only getting up to answer the phones when they'd already rung 5 or more times, and having people wait at the counters to be helped for 10 or more minutes. It was massively irritating, but I didn't have the energy to confront them. Well, about halfway through my shift, my manager told me that I can't just go in between the dining room and the counter, and if I didn't pick one or the other, she'd withhold my tips for both, since I wasn't fully invested in either. Ouch. She gave me a choice on paper, but in reality made it perfectly clear that I was stuck behind the counter and the new girl, the trainee, was on her own. There was nothing I could really do, so I just stayed at the counter, though that was plenty slammed in and of itself, and I really could have used my two coworkers who were screwing around on their phones. I didn't have time to answer phone calls, pack up orders, check people out, and take to-go orders all at once, and I had one particularly angry woman call me a lazy bitch for leaving her on hold for about 2 minutes. That stuck with me. While I was doing all this, the new girl was stuck with a packed dining room and no help. About 20 minutes into it, my manager approaches me looking both angry and sheepish. Basically, the trainee had messed up and charged the wrong orders to the wrong cards and needed help. Though the way she phrased this was, you don't have to stay by the counter the whole time. That's not what I meant. I looked over and could see her friend on her phone still, and the manager herself still had AirPods on and a show playing on her own phone screen. I responded in my sweetest, most respectful voice. I'm sorry, but as we only get paid $10 an hour, my tips are too vital for me to forfeit them, so I'm going to stay put. Context: minimum wage is $15.65 where I live. She was floored, and instead of helping either of us herself, waddled back to her seat and resumed her show. Of course, I ended up checking in with the trainee and asked if she needed my help, and if the mistake was sorted out. She said that she had things back under control and a lot of the people dining in were headed out, which was great because the counter was still slammed. The kicker? This morning apparently a customer called in and complained that the blonde girl, me, and the girl with braids, trainee, were so busy that they were sweating, while the two other women, manager and her buddy, were sitting on their phones. I only wish I saw her face when she heard about the complaint. TL, DR manager, told me to leave the new girl floundering because she and her buddy were busy on their phones, so I took her seriously and literally, even when she tried to take back what I said because there was a big mistake. Update number 1. I really wasn't expecting this to blow up, wow. It breaks my heart that a lot of people can relate. I'm having a hard time keeping up with comments, but I'm reading through as many as I can. I'll update after my shift tonight. For clarity, I'm 17, my manager is middle-aged. I have other applications out, but have yet to hear back, and am definitely planning on reporting to the state. I guess they cut corners here after all. IYKYK. I'd also like to say, yes, I am really 17. English isn't my first language, and I was raised largely by my Ukrainian grandmother, so if my vocabulary, almost said vernacular just to mess with people, is a little dated or odd, apologies. Update number 2. I've been looking into ways to try and get things sorted out. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to report it, as I've been applying for other jobs but haven't heard back, and I can't afford to be fired in retaliation. As I've mentioned in some of my responses to comments, I'm a self-supporting 17-year-old who has bills due regardless and is trying really hard to not drop out of school. So close to graduation. I've been put in touch with social programs and assistants, but they all take a really long time to hear back from. Some folks suggested starting a GoFundMe so I could afford to quit my job and still survive in the interim, but I'm not really comfortable doing that as I don't feel I'm a charity case. Yet, to that degree. I do have a Venom, if anyone's feeling particularly giving, though I'm not expecting anything, obviously, at h.and-pic23. I'll keep this post updated. Update number 3. Nothing much new to report, as there's no way to do a state audit without the name of the employee, me, being revealed. We'll keep this updated. This was textbook malicious compliance, calm, calculated, and devastatingly effective. OP followed the manager's orders exactly, exposed her laziness without breaking a single rule, and even got customer validation. Absolutely brilliant. The next story from MD Alepla. New boss gives angry me an impossible task. I don't know if this is exactly malicious compliance. Kind of a revenge story. I used to work for a big IT consulting company notorious for not paying overtime. I worked for a client's migration project for almost 1.5 years leading the functional migration team. The 3 of us worked for the client 3 years before the start of the migration project, so we knew the data we had to migrate, all the nuances, and 2 weeks before the migration date, 99% of the data was already migrated and validated. We only did the day-by-day new data and sag off pretty much those 2 last weeks. Other manager, that outranked me, became extremely angry about our calmness because the part she led was behind schedule due to bad scheduling, and everyone was being overworked because of her mishaps. Come migration date, Saturday starting 9 a.m., everyone was expecting long hours of work, but we clocked out at noon with the data validated with the client and the go-ahead signed, sealed, and delivered. My team got a written commendation from the client. The manager's team spent the entire weekend there. She got a complaint letter from the client. The manager complained about us and made me and my senior analyst spend the next month waiting for bugs, complaints. We got 5 in the whole month. My senior analyst spent 8 hours a day studying a new language. I took the chance to update my CV. I wanted out, and pretty much help a couple former colleagues that needed to solve bugs and problems within the manager's team responsibilities. A couple weeks later, evaluation time. At the IT company, everyone was graded A to D, A being exceeding expectations, D being you're out of here, B was good, C was pretty much I'm starting to think you might not be good to work here. Given the commendation from the client, I was expecting an A. My evaluation was done by the manager and my mentor, close friend with the manager. They gave me a C because we didn't see any pressure on your work, and you certainly lack motivation. I complained and took a long overdue, already planned month-long vacation. This was June. After that, back at work, I was assigned to a project on another client led by manager's husband. He wanted me to prepare 122 integrations with different systems in 4 months. I told him that in the previous project, led by his wife, they took 2 years to have 12 integrations ready, but I would give it a shot. I even emailed him the planning, where it clearly showed the time they took. 2 of those months were July and August, months where pretty much everyone on the client goes on holiday. Manager and wife also went on holiday pretty much all August. I spent those 2 months chasing people around the client's office, but starting September, 6 integrations were closed and 6 more were almost closed pending validation. Manager came back from holidays and was furious. He called me a slacker and started telling me that his wife was right, that I lacked motivation, and that I would need to spend the rest of the project duration working till midnight to make up for lost time. And I said, "No, I won't do an hour more than what you're paying. I told you that your expectations were unrealistic, and you went ahead with them anyways." He went ballistic. I replied, I just lack motivation to work in your project. I want out of the project. I was out of the project in no time. I got a call from my mentor. She said that they were evaluating firing me without pay because of this. I told them about the unrealistic planning. She said that I was being unrealistic and that the planning was good. I produced the email I sent the manager. My mentor went quiet. A minute later, she told me, "What do you want?" "If you can't guarantee I won't do an hour of overtime ever again, I want out, full severance, and then some, and I want the company to make it look like I quit, not that you fired me." She went quiet again. She said she'll see what she could do. I was out of there, smiling, by the end of the day. P.S. From the team that remained in the project, 4 guys were on my team before the migration project. They all complained. They all got out of the project as well. PS2. A fake. The project took twice the expected time to be completed. Manager's husband got nearly fired. Wife held a lot of power and managed to save his ass. TLDR. After f***ing me on a prior project, manager gives me an impossible task. I tell him that it's impossible. He goes ahead with it anyways, complains about my work when reality hits him, and tries to fire me without pay, gives me grounds to get a bigger severance than the usual. OP executed malicious compliance perfectly, followed impossible demands while clearly warning management, refused unpaid overtime, and documented everything. This smart, professional approach exposed the unrealistic expectations and managerial failures, ultimately forcing a generous severance and a clean, victorious exit from a toxic project. Next story from Dark Altar 2000. Leave the floor wet? All right, enjoy your rotten wood. First time posting here because I just remembered this incident. Back in the early 2000s, my mother, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, worked as a cleaner for a couple places and took me, 13 years old, with her to help. One place we worked for was the only real estate place in town. We cleaned up before the people who worked there got in. When I started there, it was small and somewhat dirty. Old, smelly cubicle partitions and faded brown, off-color walls, ingrained dirt in the linoleum. We cleaned, and I literally couldn't tell the difference after we were done, except the mirror in the washroom not having any spots on it and the floor being wet from the fresh mopping. Then the town started becoming a cottage town, and it is decided that they will move to a nicer place. Cottagers might find the griminess a little off-putting. New place had a bit more space, brand new blue cubicle partitions, newly painted walls that still smelled the first day I cleaned in there, and a cheap hardwood panel floor. That floor was a bit of a problem. See, before, when we mopped, we would just leave the water to dry on the linoleum. We could do that because we got there at approximately 6:30 a.m., and they opened at 7:30 a.m. The place was small enough that it was mopped by around 700 hours before we left, and would be mostly dry by the time people arrived. If we did the same thing for this cheap wood floor, my mother was worried we would have water seep into the cracks between the wood panels and rot them. So a new method for mopping was devised. First, I dunk the mop, then wring the mop lightly, mop up, wring the mop again but fully this time, and then mop up as much of the excess water as possible. This new method actually visibly got a lot more water off the floor. By the time we left, some of the earlier mopped areas would look mostly dry. Good solution, Mom. Couple weeks into the new place, my mother gets contacted by the manager, and a new order comes in that we are not to dry the floor. I asked if she explained why we dried it. She had. I found this order a bit baffling at the time, and it only occurred to me today the reason why he ordered this. The manager got in earlier than everyone else at about 7:15 a.m., so I actually saw him a few rare times when we ran late. The old floor would have still been visibly wet in the old place when he got in. The new floor was now dry when he got in. Ipso facto, we must have decided to skip mopping to leave early. Even though I didn't understand at the time that he thought we weren't doing our job, I, of course, found this new order stupid. I thought, he wants the floors wet when he gets in. Fine. Cue malicious compliance. You see, I did the mopping while my mom cleaned the washroom because I was young strapping lad and she was mom, so I did what she said. I now had a standing order from the boss to leave a wet floor, and, by gum, it was going to be sopping. From that day forth, not only did I not dry the floor, I now didn't even wring the mop after dunking it. I dipped it in the water and just let water slop off of the mop as I pulled it directly out of the bucket. There was no way this was going to dry before he got in. Probably not for an hour after he got in either. 2 weeks after I started doing this, Lo and behold, the wood paneling is already starting to separate at the seams. Dirt is accumulating between tiles. It proves impossible to remove. I was a bit shocked at the time at how fast that had happened. 4 weeks into the new mopping routine, the floor was rotting. Was my mother psychic, or what? It was apparently Osh very cheap fiberboard with a paper-thin plastic wood grain pattern on it. I would have guessed a laminate wood grain on top of semi-waterproof fiberboard if you'd asked me 4 weeks ago. The floor now had visible divots and lines where the plastic paper sank into the deteriorating wood underneath. This trapped dirt in them as well. How classy. The floor, not even 2 months after they had moved into the new place, was even worse than the old beat-up linoleum one. At this point, I asked my mother if we should start drying the floor. And wouldn't you know it, she had already asked. The answer was no. Leave it wet. Baffling. We cleaned there for another month or so. I barely felt safe walking on the floor as it was a now tripping hazard with warped parts popping up. It was also disintegrating. Splinters of wood would pop off every time I swept. The floor now had the dubious distinction of being the worst floor I had seen in a place that wasn't dilapidated. TL, DR, manager says to leave floor wet after mopping. We do. The floor rots, warps, and disintegrates. OP's malicious compliance was brilliantly executed. She followed the manager's absurd order to the letter, causing the cheap floor to rot and warp rapidly. Her precise, deliberate defiance perfectly exposed the poor decision, making the compliance both clever and impactful.